Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Alison. I write as Alison May, 50% of Juliet Bell, and most recently I write romantic comedies as Sinclair. And what we're going to talk about today is just based literally on where I am in my writing life right now, today, this week. So I'm going to do a bit of an update. I'm going to have a little bit of a talk about one particular challenge of being a writer, and that is transitioning from one project to the next. So finishing one book, moving on to the next, how you get your head out of one story and into starting something new. So if you are interested in this sort of content, all things writing and publishing related, please do hit subscribe so that you get notifications of new videos. It makes such a difference to YouTube content creators if you subscribe to the channel. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notifications. On to this week's video. So it's Thursday when I'm filming this. This video will come out on Friday, but it's Thursday when I'm filming, and it is now a week, I think just less than a week. Last Friday I sent off the final proofs on Alison Sinclair book 2, and that is now done. I got an email from my editor on Tuesday night, I think, saying yep, done, approved, sent to the printers, gone. I've written the acknowledgements, the dedication, we've signed off the final proof, and it has gone. It is out of my hands. If I wanted to change it now, I couldn't. So what next is the question. And in practical terms for me, what next is carry on writing the book that I've already been writing for about 2 months, on and 3 months maybe, on and off, because that is one of the big changes that I experienced when I became a published author rather than a unpublished author. When I was pre-published, I would write one thing and I would focus entirely on that thing, and I wouldn't think about starting something else until that first thing was finished. Not everyone works in that way, but I tend to work much better if I'm fully focused on one project at a time. If you're under contract with a publisher, you can't really work in that way, because you send off your manuscript and then maybe 4 weeks later it comes back for edits, and then you work on your edits, and then you send it back again, and then maybe 2 or 3 weeks after that it comes back for line edits, and you work on those, and you send it back again, and then maybe another 2 or 3 weeks after that it comes back for proofread, and you have to work on that. And realistically, you can't spend the rest of that kind of 3-month period not doing anything else. All the bits where the manuscript is off your desk and with your editor, or the copy editor, or the proofreader, you can't just sort of sit and stare at the wall. So realistically, you start writing something else. And if you're still under contract, what you will probably start writing will be the next book on the contract. The book I've just delivered finishes my contract with my current publisher. That's not to say there won't be another one further down the line. It would be lovely if there was. But that's not definite at the moment. So at that point, as an author, you kind of have to decide, what am I going to do next? What do I want to do next? Am I going to write a book that I think my current publisher will want? Am I going to write a book that is going to sell elsewhere? Am I going to write a book that's been kind of calling me and I've been having to put off? And I'm currently writing something completely different. That doesn't mean I'm not going to go back to writing rom-com. I definitely intend to go back to writing rom-com, possibly quite soon, hopefully quite soon really. But at the moment I'm writing something completely different to anything I've ever written before. And I started that pretty much straight after I set off the second Alison Sinclair book. So when I sent off the original manuscript, pre-edits, I'd kind of already started working on something else. But I have established over the years, with lots of trial and error and lots of doing it badly, a kind of pattern for how I transition from one book to the next. And it basically goes like this. Send book off, sleep. Because towards the end of finishing a manuscript, I work silly hours. I write much faster towards the end. So by the time I get to the point I'm ready to send something, I've written loads, I've edited loads, always set myself a deadline, whether there's an external deadline or not, because if there isn't a deadline at all, I don't do anything. So I always set myself a deadline, and I always push right to the limit of that deadline. So I will have been working silly hours. So the first thing I do is have a big sleep. And then the second thing I do is I give myself a little bit of time to kind of refill the well. Because what I very often find is after you've just delivered a book or just completed a book and sent it out on submission or to your agent if you have one, you're kind of running on empty. You've given out all of the creativity that you have to give at that moment in time, and you're sort of in a bit of a, ugh. At least I am. So I give myself a few days, usually a week, not generally more than a week, unless there's something else going on that pushes me to extend it further, like I'm ill or something as well. But I usually give myself a week to kind of refill the well. And that kind of involves usually quite a lot of reading, sometimes a bit of going for a walk. If I can go to like a museum or a gallery or something, that's great. If I can time my deadlines and things so that I go straight from finishing one book into being on holiday, even better, because then the holiday kind of serves that purpose of refilling the well. You're in a different environment, you're seeing different things, you're moving at a different pace, and it gives you time to kind of creatively reset. And then what I do is I give myself what I call noodling time. I'm not a big planner, so I very rarely will write a full scene-by-scene plan for a book. The only time I've ever done that was when I was writing as Juliet Bell, because those books were written in collaboration, so we agreed the plot outline up front. But aside from that, I'm not someone who tends to plan scene by scene by scene. What I like to do is kind of play a bit in the world of the story. So I'll quite often write down lots of my ideas about the characters, about what their backstories are, about what their conflicts are, about how they might react to each other. I might write like half a scene. I might have an idea of an opening scene, which like hardly ever ends up being the actual opening scene, but I might have an idea of an opening scene that I'll play with, and I'll sort of noodle a bit. And I'll usually do that maybe for a couple of weeks of just playing in the world with no commitment to putting down words that are actually going to be useful or practical. And then I'll start writing. So it's usually kind of week 3 or 4 of officially being on the new project that I'll actually start writing words. And as I've mentioned before in videos, what I invariably do is write about 20,000 words and then realise I've set off in the wrong direction and ditch them and start again. For the book I've just started, I've already written 24,000 words, ditched them, and then got back up to 15,000 words. So that's quite normal for me. And in a way, that works quite well with the pressure of knowing that you have edits on the previous book, line edits on the previous book, proofread on the previous book coming, because I'm still in that very early stage of the new book where I know it's still very nebulous, and I know that there's a really good chance that none of what I'm doing now is going to end up in the finished thing. So knowing that I've got, oh well, I can work on that for these 2 weeks and then I have edits coming, in a way is quite helpful, because it allows me to kind of think, oh well, I'm not writing this yet, I'm still playing. I'm playing by putting words into chapters, but I'm still playing. And so for me, that kind of crossover time where I've got my head half in the new book, but then I'm having to jump out of it and go back to do edits on the old book, is quite helpful, because it keeps me in the mindset of this is the new project and it's still really early days. And that weirdly means that when I get to 20,000 words, decide I've started in the wrong direction and it's all a terrible mess, then it doesn't feel quite as much like I'm abandoning a whole load of work, because I'm like, ah, yeah, but that was just what I was doing alongside finishing the other book. It wasn't really proper work on this book. So I didn't start my second go at writing the opening of this book until after I'd sent the copy edits on the previous book back. And so that meant that I kind of was a bit more mentally clear of the previous book when I really started getting into, okay, these are words that might actually end up in the finished version of this book sort of writing. And some people actually work like that all the time. I know lots of writers who will work on multiple projects at the same time, so be writing 2 books at the same time, for example. I really struggle to do that. I tend to time block, so if I've got edits on another book coming, I will mark out a week or 2 weeks, however long I think it's going to take, as being time to do edits, and I won't try and work on the new book while I'm doing edits on the old book. I will time block in that way. But I know lots of writers who can quite happily work on new projects in the morning and edits on previous projects in the afternoon. If that works for you, great. One thing that is really interesting, and one thing that for me makes that kind of writing my way into it time really valuable, is that I tend to write across multiple genres. So I've written romantic comedies, I've written more kind of general women's fiction, I've written more kind of issue-led, slightly grittier fiction and kind of book club fiction. And if you're writing in different genres, while all the books are going to have a voice that you hope is identifiably yours in some way, they also do have a really different tone. So part of that playing time, that noodling time that I use to transition from one book to the next, is about finding the tone of the new book and kind of casting off the tone of the previous book. And I really enjoy doing that. That for me is part of getting my head into a new story, to the point where if I write 2 quite similar books back to back, which I've just done with the 2 Ali Sinclair books, because they're both set in the same world, they have some characters who cross over, they're both very firmly in the rom-com genre, and in a way I almost find that more difficult because there isn't that differentiation of tone between the 2 stories. They do have the same tone because they're set in the same universe and feature some of the same people, and I find that then quite challenging because my brain starts to go, oh, this isn't differentiated enough, oh, this is too similar to the last book, when of course it's supposed to, at least in tone, be quite similar to the last book. There are lots of exciting new thrills and spills in terms of plot and character and all of that business, but in terms of tone they're supposed to be quite similar. That's very much what we're aiming for. But I struggle with that a little bit because my brain has got quite adept at making that transition from the tone of one book to the tone of the next. So when the tone is like super similar, my brain tries to rebel against me. Writer brains are weird. Yeah, so that's just a little update on where I am kind of writing wise at the moment. Ali Sinclair book 2 out in August is gone. It is off my desk. It is out there in the ether, being typeset and printed and all of that stuff. And I'm working on something new. More on that one day, probably, maybe. We'll see how it goes. So that's kind of how I transition. Give yourself a break. Give yourself some time to kind of refill the well, but not for long. Refilling the well is a real thing. You do need to do that from time to time, but not to the point where it becomes a procrastination technique. And accept that certainly if you're writing for publication, whether that's self-publishing or traditionally publishing, there is probably going to be some overlap between starting a new project and finishing the last one. So think about how you're going to manage that. Are you someone who can happily work on 2 things in the same day, or do you need to time block it out? So you're going, okay, my head is in edits for this period of time, my head is in writing new book for this period of time. Think about how that's going to work for you. And allow yourself time to work your way into the tone of the new book, particularly if it's significantly different to the book you've just finished. Allow yourself time to find the characters and find the voice and find the world and find the way that you want to tell this story. That's not wasted time. For those of us who aren't big planners, effectively that is our planning. It's immersing yourself in the world and in the characters and in the people to the point that when you sit down to write, you know how they're going to behave, you know how they're going to react, because you're feeling it from inside the characters. So you kind of then don't need that plan. Hopefully. That doesn't mean the plot won't still get away from you horribly. My plots get away from me horribly all the time. So yeah, that's today's video. Just a kind of brief one, a little view from the writer's desk this week. That's where we're at. Ooh, one more thing I have to show you before we go. Because I have officially got the previous book off my desk, it has been and done and gone. I have transitioned my whiteboard. there it is, over into new book status. That for me is like genuinely quite a big moment, the moment where I clear the notes, post-it notes, whatever it is from the previous book off the whiteboard, and I tend not to do that until it is done and gone. So if it's a book I've written to sub to my agent, it has to, when she's happy with it and it's out on submission, I'll do that. If it's for an existing publisher, it'll probably be after it's finalised, after the proof is finalised and it's gone to print, I will go, okay, that's gone, and then I can repopulate the notice board with notes for the new book. And that again is about telling my brain that, okay, that is over and this is fully where our focus is now. So yeah, the whiteboard has moved on to a new book, and so have I. As I say, writing and publishing content here every Friday. If you have any publishing questions or writing questions you would like answered, put them in the comments below, and I will see you next week. Farewell.